Hello guys, welcome back to Archive Ryzen. In this video, I like to talk about MARIAN Riptide's DPS if you use her as a main DPS and her weapon comparison. The weapon I'm gonna compare is MARIAN signature weapon Abyssal Nymph and MARIAN free-to-play weapon Opal Prism. While for the main DPS I use is Katya Dawnwing Manifestation 2 with tier 2 signature weapon stat. Here is the calculation result. MARIAN Riptide stat I use for this calculation is Manifestation 2 stat. The weapon stat for this comparison is Tier 2 Abyssal Nymph, Tier 1 Abyssal Nymph, and Tier 5 Opal Prism. While for the logistic talent I use is the free logistic squad that we retrieve alongside MARIAN Riptide. First of all, I wanna talk about MARIAN Riptide DPS as a main DPS in case you have buy her skin and wanna use her for fun. So here is MARIAN non-weak spot DPS and weak spot DPS. Is her DPS high? I like to say that is pretty much a little above average. However, due to she can't deal AoE damage, that will cause her a lot of trouble when fighting mobs enemy. Her standard skill indeed can hit really hard, that enough to one-shot weak enemy. But it has 2-second cooldown which can be quite problematic if you are getting swarmed by mobs enemy while the standard skill can only deal damage to one enemy per shot. However, that doesn't eliminate the possibility of using her in Paradoxical Labyrinth. Here is MARIAN's solo DPS contribution percentage. Her DPS is significantly dominated by the skill damage, so in case you want to use her in Paradoxical Labyrinth, just focus on getting any final damage buff, skill damage taken buff, and skill haste buff for the first priority. Fire rate can also be useful due to her Neura upgrade can reduce her standard skill cooldown whenever her shot hit a target. Besides that, just get any buff that can increase your ultimate energy recovery due to her ultimate skill are very good for clearing weak mobs enemy. Next is the buff or improvement that MARIAN Riptide can provide to Katya Dawnwing. Just for reminder, the Katya I use for this calculation is Tier 2 signature weapon and at Manifestation 2. Here is Katya DPS after getting buffed by MARIAN passive buff, in case you use Katya as a main DPS without ever switching to MARIAN Riptide for the whole battle. Pretty high, isn't it? And below here is Katya DPS, which already includes MARIAN Riptide 5 Kraken bullets damage. In order to calculate this, the attack rotation I use is this one. If you look carefully, you will notice that there is a repetitive pattern in this rotation, which is it always requires using 8x standard skill, continuously shooting to trigger Aurora Ray attack 3 times in order to obtain 4 count of MARIAN Kraken bullet. So one of these rotation is what I use to calculate this team DPS. If you compare with Lifer Infinite Sight and Phoenix Starshine team DPS with the same logistic and manifestation stat, when against single target enemy, more or less their team DPS doesn't have much gap. However, Lifer will able to win against Katya when she team up with Moxier due to Moxier shadows able to create an additional target for Lifer to mark. And when Lifer Infinite Sight versus Woody, she can place 3 marks on the boss that can further increase her DPS. But please don't make wrong assumption from this DPS comparison because every operative has their own advantage and disadvantage when facing certain boss, like for example Lifer can be very effective against shielded enemy due to her high ballistic damage, while Katya who has very high burst DPS allowing her to easily handle boss that has many invulnerable phase, as she can quickly trigger each invulnerable phase or even skip it. Now for the weapon comparison. Before that, let me explain a little bit about the percentage format that I will use from now on. In the previous video, I only showed the step-by-step comparison between them. Like, if you upgrade from free-to-play weapon to Tier 1 signature weapon, you will get 27% improvement, and if you upgrade from Tier 1 signature weapon to Tier 2 signature weapon, you will get 21% improvement. But from now on, I will also provide the percentage that explain about the improvement you will get by upgrading the weapon from free-to-play to Tier 2 signature weapon, which is 53% improvement. So from Marian point of view, this is the percentage improvement comparison from each weapon to Marian standard skill DPS. Looks pretty high, isn't it? However, because she is a secondary damage dealer, sub-DPS, sub-operative or whatever you want to call her, what we really need to looking at is her ability to improve the main DPS damage, which is Katya's DPS. This is the improvement comparison that Marian Riptide can provide when using each of these weapons. From here, you can see that the percentage will look really small. That is because most of Marian buff are focused on increasing the main DPS standard skill damage. Meanwhile, Katya's standard skill buff is already over-diluted, causing diminishing return issue to Marian's buff. Not to mention that, the buff also get a little bit counterbalanced by Katya's shooting damage and ultimate skill damage. So here it is, the gap is pretty small, isn't it? If you are confused whether this percentage is high or not, let's just compare it with finished Artisan weapon comparison data. From here, you can see that by upgrading from free-to-play weapon to Tier 1 signature weapon, you can already get 19% improvement. Meanwhile, in Katya and Marian case, you need to upgrade until Tier 2 signature weapon to get just a 16% damage improvement. Now, you can clearly differentiate how small the improvement from Marian's signature weapon is for Katya Dawnwing. Same thing also happened when using Vidya Agave as the main DPS. By upgrading Marian weapon from free-to-play to Tier 1 signature weapon, you will only get 9% damage improvement and 17% if you upgrade until Tier 2 signature weapon. So the question is, should you pull for Marian's signature weapon? My answer is yes. You don't need to pull for the signature weapon because the gap is really small, that it doesn't worth it to waste your pull on that thing. However, I have two reasons why you should at least have Tier 1 signature weapon. First is because Marian gameplay. In here, you can notice that there is something strange between the above DPS and the bottom DPS. The upper one DPS is when Katya pair up with Marian, but Katya does all the damage. So Katya only utilizes Marian as a full support buffer operative, while the bottom one is when Katya team up with Marian Riptide and they take turn to deal damage. From here, you can notice that when Marian Riptide is using free-to-play weapon, instead of increasing Katya's DPS, Marian is actually decreasing Katya DPS if she is included into the rotation. Why? That is because the DPS when Marian came out shoot 5 Kraken bullets and retreat, her DPS is lower than Katya DPS when paired up with her. At this point, switching to Marian Riptide will be a loss in damage and time instead of getting improvement. Not to mention that, if you didn't switch between characters smoothly, that will cause another time loss that will decrease this team DPS. And this issue is not just happening to Marian Riptide that use free-to-play weapon. If your Katya and Marian have an unbalanced build, for example when Katya have Tier 2 signature weapon and have high manifestation, while your Marian only have Tier 1 signature weapon and add manifestation 1 or 0, that might also cause Katya DPS to greatly surpass Marian DPS, and making her secondary damage dealer role become useless. So as a free-to-play weapon user or low-invest Marian, should we always need to avoid using Marian as a secondary damage dealer? The answer also yes. You can still use her as a finishing move in case the boss already dying, while your main DPS still need to set up her skill in order to deal another wave of damage. You also can still use her as long as your main DPS and Marian build are balanced, or Marian build are above Katya Dawnwing. For example, here is the comparison between Katya Tier 1 Manifestation 0 paired up with Marian at Manifestation 0. At this condition, all of Katya's DPS is below Marian DPS for every weapon Marian uses. At this condition, Marian can give benefit for your Katya's DPS if you include her into your rotation. However, if you are 2 or 3 seconds slower when doing the switching rotation, Marian will have the possibility to reduce your team DPS. For this calculation, I use 2.8 seconds to calculate Marian DPS when she unleashes 5 of those Kraken bullets and switch back. So if you are 1 second slower when doing this rotation, Marian with free-to-play weapon will lose to Katya's DPS and cause DPS reduction. And if you are 2 seconds slower, Marian with signature weapon tier 1 will also lose to Katya's DPS and cause DPS reduction. That is how sensitive it is if you want to include Marian into the rotation. For other comparison, here is manifestation to tier 1 Katya when paired up with Marian at the same manifestation. The result also the same. Free-to-play weapon has 1 second gap tolerance, tier 1 signature weapon has 2 second gap, and tier 2 signature weapon has 3 second gap. However, if your Katya were to use tier 2 signature weapon at the same manifestation with Marian, Marian's DPS with free-to-play weapon will lose to Katya DPS even without trying. While Marian's DPS with signature weapon tier 1 only has 1 second gap, while tier 2 has 2 second gap. In summary, when Marian equipped with free-to-play weapon, there is a very high chance that her DPS will drop below the main DPS operative damage and can reduce the team DPS if you include Marian into the rotation. This might be the temporary assumption I can provide, where if your Katya and Marian is at the same manifestation, and your Katya use signature weapon tier 1, then whatever weapon Marian use can provide a slight DPS increment if you include Marian into the rotation. However, for free-to-play weapon only have 1 second gap tolerance, tier 1 signature weapon has 2 second gap and tier 2 signature weapon has 3 second gap. Meanwhile, if your Katya were to use tier 2 signature weapon at the same manifestation with Marian, Marian free-to-play weapon will lose to Katya and cause DPS reduction if you try to include Marian into the rotation. While the tier 1 signature weapon only has 1 second gap and tier 2 signature weapon has 2 second gap. But I will do a further analysis about this to make sure this is correct. That is the first reason why you must pull for Marian's signature weapon. Unless you are planning to use Marian as a background support operative or as an emergency damage dealer to perform finishing move when the boss is already dying. While the second reason you must pull for Marian's signature weapon is because Marian can be a support operative or a secondary damage dealer that can pair up with any skill DPS operative due to most of her buff is a passive buff that doesn't require any triggering mechanism and has unlimited duration. That is the second reason you must pull for her signature weapon. So the conclusion is, her signature weapon tier 2 Abyssal Nymph can provide 7% improvement to Katya and Agave's DPS than tier 1 Abyssal Nymph, while tier 1 Abyssal Nymph can provide 9% improvement to Katya and Agave's DPS than tier 5 Opal Prism. In my opinion, the gap between each weapon is really small, making her signature weapon not a must-pull weapon. You can just use her as a background support operative or as an emergency secondary damage dealer to perform finishing move on a dying boss. Also, if you are lazy enough to use Marian as a secondary damage dealer, just bringing her into your skill DPS team is already pretty useful to provide some passive buff that can last for the entire battle. Additionally, there is 2 more information I'd like to tell you beside the important thing that I already explained before. First is Marian's standard skill Neura upgrade, this one. This upgrade doesn't work in a way where if you have 5 bullets, the first shot will get 80% damage increase, and the second shot get 55%, third shot gets 35%, and so on. Instead, if Marian get 5 bullets after use her support skill, all of Marian's Kraken bullet will get 80% damage increase. And if Marian only get 3 bullets after use her support skill, all of the Kraken bullets will only get 35% damage increase. Therefore, it is so important to use her support skill only after this number reaches 4 count in order to utilize this upgrade maximally. While the second thing is her ultimate skill damage, Marian's ultimate skill damage can only deal a really less total damage that almost equal to a single double tap of Katya's standard skill AoE attack. Even though the skill has larger AoE and can deal damage to every enemy within the skill AoE, this ultimate skill wasn't worth to use due to its high ultimate skill energy cost. I think that's all the information I can provide for now. I will upload a new video with more complete explanation about Marian later, so please stay tuned. Thank you for watching, see you next time, cheers!